you for tuning in to the teaching ministry of Reverend Gillard S. Glover. Now stay tuned for a powerful message.
Turn, if you would, to the 7th chapter of Acts. We're going to be looking at verses 9 through 55. So we encourage you in your home to take time to read this text. In the 6th chapter of the book of Acts, we found out that the apostles had to appoint deacons to engage in the benevolence distribution. There had developed within the New Testament church a controversy between the Greek-speaking and the Aramaic-speaking widows. The Greek-speaking widows said that the apostles were not fair in the distribution of benevolence. And so 7 Greek-speaking deacons were appointed. One of the deacons who was appointed was Stephen. Stephen was a man greatly gifted by God, gifted in both teaching and preaching. And he did much of his teaching in a very conservative synagogue called the Synagogue of the Freedmen. The freedmen were descendants of persons who had been formerly imprisoned by Pompey and were released, and they established a synagogue in Jerusalem. As I said, they were very, very conservative in their understanding of Old Testament law and in their application of Old Testament law. But Stephen was a reformer, and he tried to bring the persons in this synagogue out of the darkness into the everlasting shining light of intellectual understanding. They did not agree with Stephen. In fact, they leveled charges against Stephen. They said that Stephen blasphemed God. They said that Stephen did not have sufficient reverence for Moses. And they said that Stephen disregarded the temple of God. And so, when we look at Stephen's speech that's contained in this morning's text, it contains his refutations of their claims against him. And so for a few moments, I want to look at that speech and talk about the response of the reformer. The response of the reformer. The people in the temple asserted that Stephen blasphemed God because he said that God could be worshiped at any time, at any place, at anywhere. Because he did not accept their basic understanding that God could only be worshiped in the temple at Jerusalem, they called him a blasphemer. And so Stephen was a student of the history of Israel. And so he began to refute this point by drawing upon the history of Israel. He pointed out that the patriarch Abram met God in a place called Ur of the Chaldees, or Mesopotamia. There God came to him and told him how he wanted to bless him with an extensive progeny, but that he could not do it where he was, because the place where he was an idol worshiping community, and it was impossible to establish a God-fearing monotheistic religion among these people. And so God told Abram, take your wives and your stock, your livestock and your family, and go to a place that I will show you. Abram left. God had revealed himself in a place other than Israel. Later on, God decided to cut a covenant with the people of Israel. And in a place called Haran, he walked through the carnage of dismembered animals to make a point that he would be true to his covenant with Israel, and that if he was not, may he be torn asunder as these animals had been torn asunder. Once again, God was revealing himself in a place other than Israel. Then he told them the story of Joseph, the patriarch. Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers, and he was sold down into Egypt. But the good news was that God came and met Joseph in Egypt and empowered him greatly. He empowered him to be able to interpret dreams, and he was able to interpret the dream of Pharaoh, and he became second in command in Egypt. This was fortuitous for Israel because a famine hit all of the world, and Israel had to come down to Egypt, and there they were able to sustain themselves because Joseph was there. Joseph told him, "You meant this for evil, but God meant it for good." So once again, God had revealed himself in a place other than Israel. He revealed himself in Mesopotamia. He revealed himself in Egypt. He revealed himself in Iran. Because God cannot be contained in one place, and his revelation cannot be contained in just one place. That's why our foreparents used to sing, God is a God. God don't never change. God is a God. God don't never change. The earth is his footstool, and heaven is his home. God is a God, and God don't never change. Now, in addition to asserting that Stephen had blasphemed against God, the freedmen also asserted that Stephen did not revere Moses. This was a significant claim because Moses was greatly revered among the people of Israel. And so once again, Stephen resorted to the history of Moses and the history of Israel to show his knowledge and his love for Moses and his reverence for the community heroes, because reformers must demonstrate reverence for the heroes of the community. Stephen told them that there came a time in Egypt when Pharaoh knew not Joseph, and he became very fearful of the Hebrew community because they were having children at a very fast rate. So he determined that he wanted all the boys killed. All the boys under 2 years old had to be destroyed. But Moses, he says, was no ordinary young man, and he was able to be secured by his mother until 3 months. Then she put him in a boat made out of bulrushes and sent him on the river, where he was pulled from the river and adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. For 40 years, he was raised as an Egyptian. He was raised in the house of Pharaoh. He was taught the wisdom of Egypt until one day he had a hint of his Hebrew background, and he went to visit the slaves, and he saw how they were being tortured, and he ended up killing one of Pharaoh's soldiers. He had to leave. He then became an exile from Egypt. He went to Midian, and in Midian he learned humility. In Midian he learned patience. In Midian he learned how to be a shepherd, not only of sheep, but also of God's people. Then one day he was climbed up to a mountain, and he encountered God speaking to him out of a bush. God told him, "Go to Egypt and tell Pharaoh, let my people go." Moses was obedient, and he went to Egypt, and he delivered the message to Pharaoh. Pharaoh was resistant, but with the help of God and mighty plagues, Pharaoh let the people go, and Moses was able to lead the people out of Egypt toward the promised land. In the wilderness, the people rebelled against Moses. There were those who said they wanted to return to Egypt because life was hard. In the wilderness, they built a golden calf that they wanted to worship. But Moses came and destroyed all of those who worshiped that calf. In the wilderness, he brought to them 2 tablets that contained the sacred laws of the community. The people accepted the laws, and they accepted Moses as their leader. And he carried them on to the promised land. Reformers must demonstrate reverence for the community's heroes. That's why Martin Luther King always had reverence for Frederick Douglass, and Malcolm X always had reverence for Marcus Garvey, and Barack Obama had reverence for Adam Clayton Powell, because reformers understand that they stand on the shoulders of those who've gone before them. And so they understand that they're not locked into the interpretations of those who went before them, but they're called to serve this present age, not the age of yesteryear. So they say, to serve this present age, my calling to fulfill, amid all my powers engage, to do my master's will. And the charges leveled against Stephen were that he blasphemed God and he did not revere Moses. And finally they said that he did not have sufficient respect for the temple. Now, to the people of Israel, the temple was sacred. The temple was the place they thought that God himself dwelled in. They thought that God remained in the temple at all times. And in the temple they were able to utter their prayers. In the temple they were able to seek forgiveness. In the temple they were able to sacrifice their animals, all in an attempt to appease God. And they said that this Jesus that Stephen followed has stated that if you tear this temple down in 3 days, I'll build it back up again. He said because of this, Stephen did not have appropriate respect for the kingdom and the appropriate respect for the temple. So once again, Stephen resorted to their history, and he sought to clarify their misconception about the temple and about the place where they could worship God. He pointed out that for 38 years in the wilderness, the people worshiped God under a movable tabernacle. They fashioned the tabernacle, and they would set up the tabernacle and move it every day for 38 years. And this was the place where they met with God and prayed with God and made supplications to God. Then when they crossed into Canaan land, Joshua left the temple of the meeting, or the movable tabernacle, at Shiloh, and it remained there until David arrived. David was the one who wanted to build a temple. He was not allowed to do so because he was a man of war. But his son Solomon built a place, a permanent place for the people to worship. But it was not a permanent place for God, because God cannot be housed anywhere. God cannot be contained anywhere. God is forever moving. That's part of his nature. And sometimes people have misconceptions that we can keep God in one place, or that God can only be accessed in one place. Modern day, we call that denominationalism. There are people who think that God can only be accessed where there are hymns being sung. There are other people say that God can only be accessed where there are praise dancers dancing. Or some say that God can only be accessed when gospel music is being played. But the truth of the matter is that God is God, and he can manifest himself anywhere he wants to manifest himself. And he can be accessed anywhere he chooses to be accessed. He just wants us to be willing to worship him in spirit and in truth. He asks, what house can you build for me? What place can you provide for my rest? Did not my hands make all of these things? That's why we sing, O Lord my God, how great thou art. He built everything that we needed to worship him and to bring supplications to him. But he does not need these things. God can be worshiped wherever. For the word says, where 2 or 3 are gathered, there I am also. Well, the people did not accept the reasoning of this reformer. And so they grabbed him and they began to stone him to death. And as he was being stoned, he said, looked up to heaven and said, God, do not hold this against these people. He was just like another reformer we know. We call him Jesus, who came to reform the minds of the people and to reform their relationship. And that he too was rejected. And they took him to a place called Calvary, where they stretched him wide and hung him up high. He died, but while on that cross, he said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Reformers are not always well received by the people, but they come serving the people because they're sent by God, who wants us to worship him in spirit and in truth. Amen.
Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left the crimson stain. Sin had left the crimson stain. Sin had left the crimson stain. He washed him. He washed him. He washed him. White as snow. White as snow. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left the crimson stain. Sin had left the crimson stain. Sin had left the crimson stain. He washed him. He washed him. He washed him. White as snow. White as snow. He washed them whiter than snow. He washed them whiter than snow, yeah. He washed them whiter than snow. Whiter than snow. He washed them whiter than snow. He washed them whiter than snow. He washed them whiter than snow. He washed whiter than snow. He washed them whiter than snow. He washed them. Washed them whiter than snow. He washed them whiter than snow.